Welcome, class. Today's explainer is essentially our masterclass on how Black female artists, specifically powerhouses like Nina Simone, Aretha Franklin, and Abbey Lincoln, completely transformed musical theory and their own personal pain into these absolutely vital tools of resistance. We're going to look closely at how they use the very structure of their music to dismantle barriers and really shape the civil rights era.
Okay, so to really set the stage, we have to begin with this incredibly provocative thought from Nina Simone. She actually said this regarding her 1964 song Mississippi Goddam, which, if you don't know, was her direct, deeply visceral response to the murder of Medgar Evers and the horrific church bombing in Birmingham that killed 4 young girls. This quote establishes the incredibly high stakes and the sheer raw power of the music we're about to analyze. For these artists, this wasn't just entertainment, it was literally ammunition.
Here is a quick look at our syllabus for today. First, we'll cover roots, racism, and rejection. Then, reauthoring soul and jazz. Third, dynamics of silence and sound. Fourth, the architecture of protest songs. And finally, identity, beauty, and for women. So let's trace this journey from the highly restrictive walls of classical conservatories right out into the revolutionary streets of the civil rights movement.
Starting off with Section 1, Roots, Racism, and Rejection. Let's dig into the systemic barriers that initially shaped these unbelievable artistic legacies.
Now, you might know her as Nina Simone, but she was actually born Eunice Wayman in 1933, and she trained for years and years as a classical pianist. But look at that 1945 milestone. At just 12 years old, she flat out refused to play her classical recital until her parents, who had been forced to the back of the hall for white attendees, were moved right back to the front row. And then later on, there was this absolutely heartbreaking rejection from the prestigious Curtis Institute of Music, a rejection she always attributed to racial prejudice. This literally forced her to reinvent herself. I mean, imagine taking Bach into a rowdy Atlantic City bar. To fund her private lessons without her deeply religious mother knowing she was playing the devil's music, she adopted the stage name Nina Simone. So, the structural barriers of the classical world inadvertently birthed one of the greatest jazz and soul pioneers we've ever had.
That brings us to Section 2, Reauthoring Soul and Jazz. Next, we're going to explore how these artists took existing musical genres and totally reauthored them to claim their own space.
To really grasp the weight of their rebellion, we first need to understand the historical gender expectations in jazz. Historically, men were expected to display instrumental mastery and authority, right? They were the ones skillfully operating the instruments. But women in jazz? Well, they were frequently reduced to performing popular versions of femininity with their voices and their bodies, rather than being viewed as autonomous musical authorities. And the artists we're featuring today explicitly pushed back against that dynamic.
To see exactly how they pushed back, let's compare Otis Redding's original 1965 version of Respect with Aretha Franklin's 1967 recording. Aretha didn't just cover Otis Redding's song, she structurally reauthored the whole thing. She changed the melodic content, added those absolutely iconic call-and-response backing vocals with her sisters, and built a brand new signature coda spelling out R-E-S-P-E-C-T. Through these formal changes, she projected a strong, financially independent feminist persona that fundamentally shifted the song's ownership.
The crucial takeaway here is that Franklin's structural reauthoring became a massive global anthem because she successfully embodied what academics call multiple jeopardy. Now, this term, coined by Deborah King, refers to the intersection of several simultaneous oppressions like gender, race, and class. Franklin's version of Respect spoke directly to these intersecting oppressions without making them compete against each other. It functioned as an anthem for the civil rights movement, the feminist movement, and really anyone who had ever been marginalized.
Moving on to Section 3, Dynamics of Silence and Sound. Let's examine how classical training informed some highly expressive and, quite frankly, unpredictable live performances. Remember how I mentioned Nina Simone trained for 14 years as a classical pianist? Well, she never initially studied voice. And unlike the traditional jazz pianists of her era who leaned into loose, swinging improvisations, or her classical contemporaries who were safely confined to quiet concert halls, Simone brought strict conservatory expectations straight into noisy, smoke-filled nightclubs. She literally demanded absolute silence from her audience, which was a wild contrast to your typical lounge setting. Musically, she utilized perfect pitch and techniques like 3-part Bach-style counterpoint to totally elevate her pop and jazz arrangements. Instead of relying on vocal acrobatics, she elongated notes in dynamic tension with the piano, and she constantly integrated spoken monologues and audience dialogues into her sets. She was an absolute master of using both sound and silence as deeply expressive political tools.
Which perfectly sets up Section 4, the architecture of protest songs.
As the civil rights movement escalated in the 1960s, these vocalists began explicitly constructing protest anthems.
Think about Abby Lincoln's incredible performance in Max Roach's Freedom Now suite, specifically those wordless, primal screams in the prayer, protest, peace movement. When we listen to that, we are hearing what scholars refer to as polyphonic resonance. And this isn't just a scream, okay? It is a complex, layered sound that broke all the traditional vocal constraints to channel the lived experience, the historical trauma, and the revolutionary rage of Black women. It was a complete disruption of traditional vocal techniques that absolutely demanded to be heard.
But visual presentation mattered just as much as the sound in this era. Notice how Abby Lincoln steps completely away from the colonized, hypersexualized club singer persona she previously held. By 1964, she's utilizing a natural afro, African-inspired printed dresses, and specific jewelry to actualize a very deliberate Black nationalist aesthetic. Her afro was this prominent, undeniable symbol of racial pride that flatly rejected Eurocentric beauty standards. Basically, her visual presentation was a political protest in and of itself.
Yet there was a constant tension in how this era was broadcasted to the public. While Lincoln protested through her music and her styling, just look at this extreme, hyper-focused camera framing on her mouth during an intense 1964 television performance. Academic analysis suggests that this kind of tight framing risks entirely erasing the careful, powerful identity she curated with her dress and hair. It inadvertently reinstates those sexualized, hypervisible stereotypes of Black women that she was so actively fighting against. It's a really fascinating look at the struggle for narrative control.
So the crucial point we must take away from all this is just how vital this musical architecture actually was. You see, because formal leadership roles in the civil rights movement, like preaching or leading large organizations, were very often denied to women, music became their pulpit. By improvising or changing lyrics to popular songs, their protest became the nation's guiding light, providing serious sustenance and direction to everyone fighting for equal rights.
Now for our final section, Section 5, Identity, Beauty, and For Women. Let's look at how music explicitly dismantled the devastating psychological effects of systemic racism and sexism. Let's analyze Nina Simone's masterful 1965 song, For Women. In this track, Simone fearlessly exposed the Eurocentric beauty standards constantly imposed on Black women in America. She systematically breaks down these four incredibly harmful historical stereotypes: the mammy, the tragic mulatto, the sex worker, and the angry Black woman. She does this by exploring the deep internal dilemmas and the pain associated with skin tones ranging from light to dark. Simone wrote this to inspire Black women to define beauty and identity entirely for themselves, infusing centuries-old stereotypes with this visceral realism, anger, and profound dignity.
As we wrap up today's lecture on this explainer, I really want you to think about the massive legacy these artists left behind. From bringing classical mastery to the jazz lounge, to completely redesigning pop structures to demand respect, to utilizing the absolute sonic power of a scream. I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder for your next assignment. Are modern artists continuing to build upon this incredibly complex architecture of protest, or have we somehow retreated back to safer, quieter sounds? Thank you so much for joining me today, class. I'll see you next time.